ever since the PNB scam came to light. We've had several eminent former bankers as well as policymakers from Montek Singh Ahluwalia to the former RBI Governor Bimal Jalan weigh in on specifically this issue, whether there needs to be an amendment of the Banking Regulation Act to give the Reserve Bank more powers to supervise public sector banks, and whether the Department of Financial Services, which is the arm of the government that really regulates PSBs, should be done away with altogether. Joining us now to take the conversation forward is the former RBI Deputy Governor H.R. Khan, as well as banking sector expert Ashvin Parekh. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here. Mr. Khan, you know, this debate is back on the table, and this is what Urjit Patel has told the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, saying that the Banking Regulation Act needs to be amended to give the RBI powers to supervise public sector banks in the manner in which it does private sector banks. Do you believe the time has come for that change, sir?
I believe, if you recall, Governor Patel had articulated this in a speech he gave in Gujarat National Law University a couple of months back, when he talked about banking regulatory powers should be neutral from ownership point of view, and this was based on from what is that Financial Stability Assessment report had talked about. It
also evoked a very strong reaction from the government, sir. You know, after the governor made that speech, there was an equally strong reaction from the government, which seemed to suggest that it took umbrage at the Reserve Bank trying to shirk its responsibility of what had happened at the Punjab National Bank.
No, there are actually, this issue is quite old, and we need to keep it, the perspective in mind. We need to have a level playing field so far as the Reserve Bank's regulatory and supervisory powers are concerned. I think this government should not have any issue, because there are certain functions of public sector banks on which RBI doesn't have its power. For example, removal of directors or management of the public sector banks. They can't force merger of public sector banks. Some of these issues have been highlighted for quite some time. So it's high time those amendments are brought. But equally important is
but you know, Mr. Khan, exactly on that issue, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but as you yourself pointed out, this is not a new debate or a new discussion, sir. This has been on the table. The fact that the government has not proceeded to take this route, to take this direction, seems to suggest that it perhaps is not in the mood to relent control. Is that not where the problem lies? And do you really feel hopeful that we could perhaps see this amendment moving forward?
I don't know what is the level of dialogue between RBI and the government. But it is in everybody's interest. It is also in the interest of the government to see that the oversight of our public sector banks are also equally effective. And those gaps in those oversight powers of RBI is plugged. But equally important, as I was trying to tell, is that RBI also has to improve its capability and capacity, which it has been doing over the years. For example, we have moved to risk-based supervision. But few areas I think we need to strengthen in terms of specialization, in terms of areas where probably we have to relook at our supervisory process. For example, you mentioned about PNB thing. You have moved to inspection only at the head office, risk-based supervision. I think some amount of transaction testing and some amount of branch-level verification may also be necessary. So these are some of the areas where further strengthening and retweaking of our supervisory and regulatory powers may be needed.
You know, beyond the fine-tuning that you just spoke of, Mr. Khan, I also want to get your reaction on the number that the Reserve Bank Governor has shared with the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Banks reported 5,904 frauds worth 32,361 crores in the last financial year. Now, what to your mind, beyond the issues that you just spoke of in terms of the supervisory role being strengthened, specialization and additional capabilities being brought into the Reserve Bank, what do you believe is the need of the hour when it comes to cracking down on bank frauds? I mean, we're talking about a 17% rise over the previous year in FY18 at almost 32,000 crores.
No, there are different ways of looking at it. The basic banking areas, where in the credit areas where you need to tighten both the appraisal standards as well as disbursement standards and credit monitoring standards, that we have to do. And the operational risk area is also, which was evident in case of PNB. Those areas also need to be tightened. I think we have to use a lot of analytical tools which are available now for fraud management. And RBI also has laid down quite a few detailed guidelines, board committees, and red flagging of those frauds and looking at the systemic lacuna. I think they need to be followed up thoroughly, because whatever you do, banking fraud, you can't totally eliminate, but you should always try to keep yourself up to date and use the tools as available to see that they are minimized.
Okay, let me go get in Ashvin Parekh as well. Mr. Parekh, as we were pointing out, this is not new. The idea that the Reserve Bank Governor has floated, as Mr. Khan rightly pointed out, he spoke of this in an earlier speech as well a few months ago when the PNB scam came to light. Do you see any possibility of the government moving towards an amendment of the Banking Regulation Act to, in fact, provide the Reserve Bank more powers to regulate PSBs?
Well, actually, I'm seeing that happening, and I'll explain why, Shireen. You touched upon something very interesting. You know, the first knee-jerk reaction on the part of the government after Dr. Patel, the governor, delivered this speech at the Gujarat University, at one of the institutions, you know, the first knee-jerk reaction was that there is adequate powers, you know. But then the dialogue between the RBI and the government that must have happened, you know, must have really convinced the government that there must be a need for doing something. The reason I see is very simple, Shiri. Government is not just, you know, a referee around here. He's also the shareholder. Now, he suffers the most if, for instance, more frauds happen or if there are irregularities in the banking system. So, I mean, I do take a point that the government has to, I mean, irrespective of whether it likes or it otherwise, has to really examine the real reasons behind why the regulator cannot, you know, exercise his regulatory controls on the public sector banking companies. And I suppose, therefore, I'm glad, you know, I mean, we did not see any conversation between the two to an adverse sort of, you know, going in a wrong direction in the meanwhile. So, I mean, I am also getting a sense that there must be a healthy dialogue that must have got conducted during this time after the spate of initial knee-jerk reactions initially. And that must have led to this. I mean, personally, I do believe that these 9 or 10 or whatever the number of amendments are required, they are very essential, you know, for the regulator. I mean, if the regulator comes out with a circular saying that the switch and must be directly connected to the core banking system, for example, and if the banking system does not comply with that, then the regulator will need more teeth to really start biting, you know.
Right. Okay. Gentlemen, I also want to get your comments on another development, and this is a comment that's coming from Uday Kotak on the possibility of the government looking or re-looking at the option of consolidation in the public sector banking space. And Mr. Khan, let me start by asking you, Uday Kotak says the timing is wrong, just ahead of a general election. This is not the right time for the government to press ahead with consolidation of the public sector banking space. Would you agree?
I don't know what was the thinking of Mr. Kotak about the timing, but he must be having valid reason. But my sense is that consolidation is inevitable. We have to do it. Pure for the simple reason that we need to cut down the expenditure of public sector banks because over proliferation of branches. And we need people. We don't get people for 21 banks to man 21 banks. So I think that is what is needed. And in the meantime, before we plunge into a full-fledged consolidation, I think soft consolidation should start in the areas of where the banks in a specific region can work together and coordinate among themselves, for example, in credit appraisal or credit monitoring, risk management, HR development. These are some of the areas they should start soft consolidation, and on the IT side. So eventually when the merger, the consolidation happens, it will be painless and relatively less bumpy.
So you're then suggesting that there be a regional, thrust when it comes to consolidation, at least to start with?
That's one model. The other model could be a mix and match of region and the asset size, all the cultural issues or IT part of it. So we can have different models. But I think we should start working on soft consolidation, what I mentioned.
Okay, let's just listen into what Uday Kotak had to say on PSB consolidation before I bring in Ashvin Parekh with his point of view.
At this point of time, 1 year before election, it's the wrong time to be thinking about consolidation of public sector banks in any shape at this point of time.
But when do you think, do you think there is a scope or there's reason enough for so many banks to exist when a lot of them are doing the same work and are not in a good position? The government is also not able to capitalize all of them to the extent needed.
Right time you have to think about these things, okay?
You've been a big champion of the IBC, but are you as a banker really satisfied with what we've seen so far? I know you said the government has been quick to respond with changes, but some of those changes, especially the Section 29A, has been the cause for a lot of these delays.
No, I think you have to, some of the first successes are good. The process is evolving. Some of it is taking a little longer. In many cases, 270 days period is getting over.
Yeah.
So we have to watch the process, and I think this is a process of evolution. The most important point about IBC is it has decisively changed the balance in favor of the creditor in control versus the debtor in control. And I think that's a very powerful move.
Well, that's Uday Kotak saying timing not right for PSB consolidation a year ahead of the general elections. Ashvin Parekh, would you agree?
Yes, I do agree. I mean, if we go back to the first time ever we talked about seriously about consolidation was 2004. Immediately after the new government came in, Mr. Chidambaram, the then finance minister, talked about it, and we've been talking about it regularly. I suppose some of the efficiencies and the benefits that could have come out of consolidation in public sector banking, they are perhaps not as sharp as they were in 2004 or in 2005 era. But be it so, timing-wise, it's all wrong. 1 year to election, I totally agree. So the government will have to make several amendments. There is a larger subject of corporatization before consolidation. And you have to move these banking companies into Companies Act rather than in the nationalized banking fold. That itself requires bold effort on the part of the government to make amendments at the parliament level, to make the necessary changes in the law. Not just one law. Several laws will have to be amended.
Right.
So I think timing-wise, we missed this boat this time. Maybe after the elections, depending on the outcome of the elections, we may see some action in consolidation.
Okay, it might be inevitable, but perhaps it's unlikely to go through in the tenure of this government. And as Mr. Parekh was rightly pointing out, it will require amendments to the Bank Nationalisation Act. So might be too much to chew, at least ahead of the general elections. Ashvin Parekh, HR Khan, appreciate you joining us here on cnbc TV 18 to talk about the big developments in the banking space with the RBI Governor Urjit Patel deposing before the Parliamentary Standing Committee. With that, it is time for us to wrap up the cnbc TV 18 special. Do stay tuned. Markets Day Talk back up next. We'll see you again in just a bit.